The movie opens with two girls sitting on a bench having a conversation. And in this conversation, we kind of get to know these two characters. First of all, you have Sister Paxton, and she is basically the more naive and sensitive out of these two main characters in the movie. And then you also have Sister Barnes, who is the little bit more mature and reserved out of the two. And the conversation these two have in the scene is really funny, where basically Sister Paxton is relaying this experience she had where she watched a dirty movie that convinced her that humans have souls, basically. And it's a funny scene. The humor in the scene is surrounding religion, but the girl's religion isn't the butt of the joke. And I appreciate that, because if it was, it would have pretty quickly turned me against the movie. Getting into the plot, these two girls are missionaries for the Mormon church. So after a long day of, going around handing out pamphlets and whatnot, they come to the house of this middle-aged man played by Hugh Grant. The character just goes by Mr. Reed throughout the movie. And apparently he'd asked to hear more about the church or something like that. And so the church sent these two to evangelize him. And they get to the door, and it's raining outside, much like it is here. So he invites them inside. He tells them that he has a wife, because they're not allowed to go inside a house with just a man alone for obvious reasons. But he tells them he has a wife who's, in the kitchen baking blueberry pie. And so they come in and they sit down and they start discussing the church and they start discussing religion. This part was a little bit spoiled by the trailer, but that almost just makes it more tense, because it's only a matter of time before things go bad. The only question is when things are going to go bad. And the first sign of trouble is when Mr. Reed brings up the topic of polygamy, which is a topic that's very controversial in Mormon theology, where I guess in the early church, it was condoned and considered okay, but then in later years, it was condemned by the church. And so he brings up this topic as a way to start challenging their faith. And it's in moments like this where I feel like the movie really shines, because it starts asking those uncomfortable, challenging questions that are going to make some people uncomfortable. But it doesn't just attack. It also offers a defense in the form of Sister Barnes, making a defense of the church. And, while I'm not personally convinced by her defense that she offers in this movie, some people will be. And that's the great thing about this movie, is it opens up those questions, but it doesn't condemn people for, believing either way. And this is where the sisters start to get really uncomfortable. So just in time, Mr. Reed declares that it's time for pie, and he goes to the kitchen, allegedly, which is somehow down this dark, creepy-ass hallway that he goes around a corner. And so this is where you get the great moment that was in all the trailers, where Sister Barnes looks at the candle that Mr. Reed was burning on the table there, and the scent labeled on the candle is blueberry pie, which obviously means that the smell they've been smelling of the pie is artificial. And so, they get pretty freaked out by that. They start trying to escape the house, but the front door is locked and all the windows are too, small for them to squeeze through. And so the only response for them to do is basically to buck up and go down this hallway to this other room where Mr. Reed is waiting for them. Almost the entire movie takes place in these 4 locations throughout the house. And I love that, because it makes the movie feel almost like a stage play. The first location is the sitting room where they first came into the house. And then the second location is this study room that they come into once they go down the hall. And the room is all decked out in religious symbols and paintings and books and whatnot. And the section of the movie that takes place in this room is probably my favorite segment of the movie. Because once the girls get to this study, Mr. Reed informs them that the front door won't open. It's locked on a timer or some, excuse that he makes up. And so he tells them they have to exit through the back of the house if they want to go out. And he indicates these 2 doors that allegedly will lead to the back of the house. But obviously the girls are very suspicious and are not willing to just, walk through the doors trusting blindly. So now that he has a captive audience, Mr. Reed starts explaining his views on religion by comparing different religions to board games. I could talk about just this segment of the movie for like an hour with all the questions and arguments and symbolism that are brought up. There are so many great points made here, both by Mr. Reed and by Sister Barnes when she kind of fights back a little bit. This is why I recommend people go see the movie. But in short, Mr. Reed has studied a bunch of different world religions, and the more that he studied, the more disillusioned he became by the entire topic of religion as a whole. He was bothered by the fact that every religion claims to be the true religion, but obviously that can't all be the case. And he's also bothered by the fact that so many religions seem to share similar mythologies and stuff. And so the conclusion that he eventually came to is that all religions are fake, but the underlying symbolism and mythology that they have point to a deeper underlying truth, which he refers to as the one true religion. One small thing that I'm not sure if I like about this scene is that while Mr. Reed is lecturing, the girls managed to obtain a letter opener that he had just laying around in the office. And, they hide it. And this comes back and becomes a big plot point later. But it just doesn't quite sit right with me because Mr. Reed is so observant and calculated. And he's gone through so much work to set up this whole trial for these girls. Why is this detail the thing that he missed? Like, why would he miss something as obvious as leaving this sharp weapon out in the girls' reach? It doesn't seem to be a deliberate choice based on how he reacts to things later. And so maybe there's an explanation I'm missing, but small little flaw with the movie that I don't like. Anyway, Mr. Reed labels the two doors in his study. On one of them he writes belief, and on the other one he writes unbelief. And he tells the girls to choose one or the other door. And, after much deliberation, they choose the belief door, even though we eventually find out both doors lead to the same place. And through that door, we get to the third major location of the movie, which is the basement. So in the basement, Mr. Reed talks to the girls through a pipe, and he tells them that they are about to witness a miracle. He sends down this tattered woman holding an actual blueberry pie, and he tells them that the pie has wolfsbane in it, so if she eats it, she's going to die. But when she dies, she will then be resurrected, and they will witness it and bear witness to it as a miracle. And the way this whole situation is set up does a great job of asking questions about the resurrection of Christ, which is like the most sacred reality in Christianity, at least. And I don't know that much about Mormonism, but I'm pretty sure it's a big deal there. And so if there's one big thing that you're going to go after, one big question you're going to ask, this is going to be the thing you want to attack if you want to attack those religions. And I think the movie does an interesting job of like asking questions about that using this scene. So the lady does eat the pie and she does die. The girls check her pulse and discover that she is indeed dead. But then right after she dies, an elder from the church shows up to basically investigating the disappearance of these two girls who have not come back to check in. And while Mr. Reed is distracted talking to this elder at the door, the two girls are, making plans and trying to escape. And I love movies about people who are in captivity trying to escape. It's kind of something like the M. Night movie Split did, but this movie's a lot better than that one. I just love this whole sequence here where they're trying to, find a way out. So after talking to the elder at the door, Mr. Reed comes back and the girls discover that while they were distracted trying to escape, the prophet lady who died has somehow seemingly resurrected. And so Mr. Reed comes down and starts pressing them and asking them questions like, what did you see? Did you witness a resurrection? Did you witness a miracle? And this is where Sister Barnes starts pushing back on his bullshit pretty hard. And so he kills her. It's a pretty startling scene, but like they're about to stab Mr. Reed. And right as they're about to stab him, he pulls out a box cutter and just slices her throat. And she seemingly dies. After she gets over her initial shock, Paxton starts putting together the pieces and realizes that the way that Mr. Reed staged this resurrection is that while the girls were distracted with trying to escape, he sent in a second a live woman to remove the dead body of the first woman and then, act like she was the one who got resurrected. And that leads her to discover a door in the floor that leads to the fourth location of the movie, the sub-basement. And, Mr. Reed tells her, don't go down there unless you're ready to discover the one true religion. And so, of course, she goes down there because what other choice does she have at this point? And in the sub-basement, she goes through a bunch of doors that are, symbolically painted with a bunch of religious imagery and whatnot. And she comes out at the end into this concrete room full of a bunch of tattered, broken women, all in cages. And this is where we realize that Mr. Reed is a real asshole. I mean, if you didn't realize it already, he's literally got a sprinkler system in this room that's just there to keep these women in cages cold so that they continue to suffer. Like, screw this guy. Mr. Reed comes into the room and Paxton finally understands his big point. Basically, he believes that all religions are just simply built on the desire to control people. And this is a great moment because it brings the movie together in a really disturbing way. But it also does raise some questions that I'm not exactly sure I have satisfying answers to. First of all, what's the purpose of him staging this whole trial in the first place? Was it just to psychologically break Paxton before he locks her up with all these other women? Because if so, that seems like a little bit of a difficult process to go through if all he cares about is just locking up and tormenting these women for some reason. And speaking of these other women, who are they? Are these people that he also did this same thing to and took them through this trial? Because if so, I feel like that's stretching credibility, because if you're living in this community, this city, and there's a bunch of missionaries all disappearing in this area, wouldn't that start to raise some questions? Wouldn't people start to get suspicious? I feel like it wouldn't be that difficult to track the disappearances of a bunch of missionaries all to this one guy, who I'm assuming is continuously asking for missionaries to be sent over. So if that's the case, if that's where all these women came from, that doesn't sit right with me. Maybe there are answers to these questions that I just missed in this very detailed movie. Maybe someone can, help me out in the comments. But these are just questions that nagged at me a little bit. I still do love the movie overall. Anyway, just when Mr. Reed thinks he's won, Paxton pulls out that letter opener and stabs him in the neck. And she almost makes it, but he catches up to her and stabs her in the stomach. And he almost finishes the job, but Barnes unexpectedly gets up off the floor and whacks him in the head with this 2x4 that has like nails sticking out of the end of it. And a funny detail that someone else brought up that I thought was interesting is that the 3 nails sticking out of the end of this board could be seen as like a representation of the nails in Christ's hands and feet on the cross. Or if you want to really stretch, like a representation of the Trinity, which I think is just one of the many little details that makes this movie awesome. But even though she was victorious over Mr. Reed, Barnes still dies, but it does give Paxton enough time to escape the house. And once she's outside safely, she hallucinates this butterfly landing on her hand, which is like something that she talked about earlier with wanting to be reincarnated as a butterfly that could follow her loved ones around. I was afraid that we were going to get like a Hereditary style ending to this movie, but the ending they did give us ended up being pretty sweet, despite the dark places that this movie does go to. There is so much more I could say about this movie. The questions it raises, the points it raises are really interesting. It's the kind of stuff that I love to think about and love to talk about. And yeah, I think the movie does a really good job with that stuff. It's also just a really solid thriller as well. I like this movie a lot. Anyway, that's it for this video. As always, my opinions are the objectively correct opinions, so if you disagree with me, you are wrong, but tell me if you're wrong in the comments. And with that said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next review.